Hello and welcome to History Cross Tech. I'm Tech Elf and I like to talk about some of my favorite history topics on this channel and look at some modern parallels and interesting applications that might surprise you. Today, I want to talk about the Hampton Court Astronomical clock. You might be thinking, what's so special about a clock? But it's genuinely fascinating. This particular clock, built in the year 1540, Henry VIII, still works today. It's still there today. And it's this sophisticated 15-foot clock that shows all this information. It shows the time, the calendar, the astronomical positions, and it even predicts the tides for navigation on the River Thames. It's been running continuously for nearly 500 years, which is pretty extraordinary when you think about it. It's also at Hampton Court Palace, which I will talk about in a later episode, is one of my favorite palaces. It hosts a few quirky things. It hosts the grapevine, which is the world's largest grapevine, and it's now over 250 years old. It was planted in 1766 when Lancelot Capability Brown, who designed a lot of the famous gardens in British castles, designed it. It's mind-blowing in size, and they still have harvests. The average crop of the black dessert grapes is about 272 kilograms. Anyway, enough about the grapevine. I'll talk about that in another episode. It also has these ancient yew trees in the Great Fountain Garden, which are over 300 years old, and they've been fashioned to pretty much grow down to the ground, which is pretty extraordinary. And they have a wilderness garden of over 12,000 daffodils, with around 1 million daffodil bulbs in the garden in total. The area was originally Henry VIII's orchard, filled with pear trees, apple trees, and cherry trees. And it's a really beautiful palace with this gorgeous garden. But what I wanted to talk about today in this episode was the clock that sits in this same palace, and I've put it as the image of this episode, and it's the Hampton Court Astronomical clock. So let me set the scene for you. Picture this. It's the year 1540 and you are at Hampton Court Palace. You look up at the gatehouse to the inner court and there is this massive golden clock face. At a glance, it tells you all this information you need to know, like a really impressive dashboard, way before dashboards existed. It tells you the time, but also the date, the month, what zodiac sign the sun is in, because I guess that was important back then. It tells you the phase of the moon, how many days since the last new moon, and the really clever bit is it tells you when high tide will be at the London Bridge. And why would Henry VIII care about the tides at the London Bridge? Well, you see, Hampton Court was slightly outside of London, and the royal barge was how the court travelled. Because in the year 1540, the Thames River was actually London's main highway. So the court travelled through the royal barge, and the London Bridge at the time, it was this massive medieval structure with these 19 narrow stone piers that created this dangerous condition, these dangerous rapids when the tide was at the wrong place. So knowing when it was safe to travel by boat wasn't just useful information, it was essential data that determined when the king could actually get around his own kingdom. And just as a side note, if you go back to one of my previous episodes, I've talked about this medieval London Bridge because these 19 narrow stone piers were so narrow that in the winter when the weather was really cold, the Thames River would actually freeze over. And did you know, during one of these winters, an elephant walked across the River Thames, and they would have these London frost fairs, roast ox, and all sorts of market type things on the River Thames. But that's for another episode. Today, we talk about the clock. So to understand why this clock matters so much, also from a political perspective, you need to understand a little bit about Tudor England and Henry VIII's court. This was the Renaissance, period of incredible intellectual and technological advancement. European courts were competing to attract the best mathematicians, astronomers, artists, and craftsmen. And having cutting-edge technology wasn't just about prestige. It demonstrated the power of applied knowledge. Henry VIII was particularly interested in timekeeping and astronomical instruments. These weren't just curiosities, they had real practical applications for navigation, calendar keeping, and understanding the natural world. And if you think about it, these royal European courts competing to attract the best mathematicians kind of reminds me of, today all these tech companies, AI companies competing to attract the best AI talent. But that's a story for another day. So who was the intellectual force behind this clock that was the first of its kind in the day, and also this clock that has lasted 500 years to still be working today? I was pretty amazed when I was in London at Hampton Court Palace, staring at this clock, and the dials still moved, and it still showed me what zodiac time we were in and the conditions of the River Thames, which is quite remarkable if you think about it. So there was a chap called Nicholas Kratzer. He was a Bavarian mathematician and astronomer, and he was the force behind this clock. He was born in Munich around the year 1487, and he arrived in England in 1516. His official title was the Deviser of the King's Horloges, which essentially means the king's expert in timekeeping devices. But Kratzer was actually much more than just a court mathematician. He quickly established himself in Tudor England's intellectual circles. He tutored the children of some notable people, for example, Thomas More's children. He tutored them in mathematics and astronomy. He was friends with Hans Holbein the Younger, who was one of the period's most famous painters, and with Erasmus, the great humanist scholar. And by the year 1520, Henry VIII had appointed him the royal astronomer, and the court records show that he was earning £5 per quarter, which was a substantial money for the time. What made Kratzer particularly valuable, though, was that he wasn't just theoretical. He designed these practical instruments that were astronomical instruments and sophisticated sundials. He really understood both the mathematics, theoretically, but also how to practically make things that actually worked. And there's this wonderful portrait of Kratzer painted by his friend Holbein in the year 1528. In it, he's surrounded by mathematical instruments, dividers, astronomical tools, and this unfinished polyhedral dial. Art historians believe that Kratzer actually advised Holbein on the technical accuracy of the instruments, shown in other court portraits as well. And he was this man that operated at the intersection of knowledge but also practical application, which made him pretty handy to have at court. However, the craftsman that actually built this, well, Nicholas designed it. The craftsman that built this was another Nicholas. He was a French clockmaker who would serve 4 successive English monarchs. He was a Huguenot, a French Protestant, and his technical skills made him invaluable to the Tudor court. In the year 1541, shortly after the clock was installed, Rosion was officially appointed as clock-keeper to Hampton Court. He was responsible for maintaining not just this astronomical clock, but timepieces throughout the royal palaces, Hampton Court, Oatlands, and Westminster. And he held this position until his death in 1590, nearly 50 years of service. If you look at the clock's central mechanism today, you can apparently see Rosion's initials, NO, and the date 1540 carved into the gears. Nearly 500 years later, his signature is still there on the parts that are still turning. And I love this story because the collaboration between Kratzer, the mathematician, and Rosion, the craftsman, is a perfect example of Renaissance innovation, bringing together theoretical knowledge and practical engineering. Kratzer understood the mathematical relationships that govern celestial movements, and Rosion knew how to translate those calculations into mechanical systems that could run reliably for hundreds of years. And essentially, if you look at this clock, it's a really beautiful medieval dashboard. So I love telling this story, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. Yeah, I'm Tech Elf, and thank you for watching this episode.